warm welcome to everyone joining us online today. Thank you so much for being with us. I'm Claire Coué, and I'm a business development manager for SGS INSPIRE, based in Brussels, Belgium. And I will be your host for this webinar. So, what's on the agenda for today? We will spend 1 hour together with experts Kristin Moore, Terrence Higgins, Jorge Sierra from SGS INSPIRE, and we will be discussing the impact of the US Inflation Reduction Act 1 year later. So how is the IRA boosting the US biofuels industry? Which specific incentives are supporting the decarbonization of the US aviation sector? What about the use of hydrogen in transport and investments in hydrogen in general? Has there been an IRA effect on global energy markets and industrial policies in the rest of the world? What does the IRA mean for the US climate goals in general? And also, what are the weaknesses of the IRA? How could it be improved? We will tackle all of these questions and even more during our time together. But before we get to the heart of the matter, I would like to say a few words about SGS INSPIRE. SGS INSPIRE is the market intelligence service of the SGS company. Now, you might be familiar with the SGS company. We are a leader in testing, certification, and inspection for all gas and chemical products and way beyond that. And SGS is recognized as the global benchmark for sustainability, quality, and integrity. So what do we do at SGS INSPIRE exactly? Well, we provide our clients with unique data on actual fuel quality at the retail fuel station across the globe. And we combine that data with deep policy, regulatory, and market analysis on all transport fuels and all transport-related policies, such as vehicle emissions, for example. So if you want to get in touch with us, just click on the bottom, contact us at the bottom of your screen. And of course, you can subscribe to our services, but you can also just buy some of our material or some of our reports. Now, before we start, I would like to push a little poll to you in the audience. The question that we have for you today is, which alternative transport fuel will benefit the most from the IRA supports? So you should see the poll appearing right now. There should be a pop-up window opening, and you should be able to submit your answer to the poll. Please do that. While you do that, I want to flag that there is a chat box at the bottom of the webinar page. It's your tool to send us any question during the webinar, and we will have a look at them at the end with our experts. Hopefully you had the time to answer now, and we can see the poll results. All right. Sustainable aviation fuel, according to you, is the transport fuel that will benefit the most from the IRA support. Interesting also for you, Terry. We will discuss that later on. Let's start with our first speaker, Jorge Sierra, my colleague. Jorge, you are SGS INSPIRE Market Analyst for North America. You have a long-standing experience in market analysis, in consulting for energy and finance industries. You were previously with Wood Mackenzie Consultancy, and you have expertise in performing economic research and delivering market intelligence. So, Jorge, if we dive right into the topic, could you tell us about the overall objectives and impact areas of the IRA? Can you give us some background?
Yes, sure. Thank you, Claire. So I will just give a very quick and general overview of the program of the Inflation Reduction Act. The Inflation Reduction Act is a U.S. legislation that was approved last year and was motivated by a combination of economic and environmental factors. The primary motivator, as the name of the bill says, was to address the rising inflation in the U.S., primarily using two mechanisms. One, reducing the federal deficit of the government, and second, and the most important for our conversation, encouraging long-term investments in domestic energy production, particularly in the clean energy sector, with the objective to reduce energy costs in the long term. The reason for this is that lower energy costs can help to control inflation, as energy prices significantly influence the cost of almost all goods and services throughout the economy. Almost all the economy is related to, or the energy prices has an effect on the overall prices of the entire economy. So the increased adoption of clean energies is one of the main goals of the Inflation Reduction Act, but it was not the only focus of the program. Some other of the main objectives of the legislations are reduce carbon emissions and accelerate the transitions to a greener economy by supporting renewable energy, energy efficiency, and the development of new and low emission technologies and fuels. Energy security by promoting the domestic production of clean energy. By doing this, the Inflation Reduction Act intends to enhance the U.S. energy independence and security, reducing the reliance on foreign energy sources. Another objective was to promote technological innovation in the clean energy sector, and some or other areas not related to energy but important for the Inflation Reduction Act was reduce the healthcare costs in the economy, the proposal of a tax reform and increased tax collection enforcement in the economy. And as you can see, the acts or the general acts objectives are multifaceted, with a strong emphasis on promoting the widespread adoption of clean energy with the US economy in the long run. And one year after, some of the tangible results that the implementation of the Inflation Reduction Act has shown are 270 billion announced in private clean energy investments, the creation of 70,000 new jobs as a result of these announced projects, and the availability of 70 billion in form of grants, rebates, and other tax exemptions that the government has made available for the market.
Thank you, Jorge. It's clear that the focus is on green energy, green growth, but also beyond that. I would like to turn to Kristin now and introduce her very quickly. Kristin Moore is a leading expert in renewable and alternative fuels, especially on the quality, regulatory, safety, and environmental aspects. Kristin is the CEO of K-More Consulting, which is her own consultancy, and she's developing opportunities for increased renewable fuel and chemical usage in domestic and global markets. Thank you so much for accepting our invitation, Kristin. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you very much. Good morning.
One direct question to you. So the IRA, if my information is correct, includes $10 million in grants to support the advancement of domestic biofuel industry. And I believe this envelope covers bioethanol, biodiesel. Is this an absolute game changer for the US biofuel industry? And according to you, which type of biofuel will benefit the most from the IRA boost?
Thank you, Claire. That is a great question. It's absolutely a game changer. The biofuels industry, we're very pleased that this administration is focused on addressing climate change. You know, it's a pretty ambitious goal to get to a 50% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions, you know, baseline 2005, and get there by 2030. You know, that's only 7 years from today, right? And we're actually at the end of 2023, so we really only have about 6 years. You know, when we look at the IRA, our industry is focused on about 4 areas, right? The 45Q for carbon capture, sequestration. We're looking at SAF, right? Sustainable Aviation Fuel, and 40B. We're looking at 45Z in the clean fuel production credit. And then importantly, we're looking at the $500 million that got allocated to the USDA for the Higher Blends Infrastructure Incentive Program. And, you know, we feel that's just huge incentive for domestic use, right? I think some of these other tax incentives can be used for more of a global access situation. So, even though we were just talking about how this legislation is 1 year old, there's still some very serious issues that need to be resolved. Our industry, my industry, can't capitalize on these incentives like the production tax credit because the U.S. Treasury hasn't adopted a scheme by which we can do our carbon scoring. We don't have enough information to support a decision on how to capitalize, on how to get to a lower score, thus, get to the $1 a gallon incentive. That's a huge issue, and you can see that our champions in Congress are, putting forth legislation and consideration for the U.S. Treasury to sort that out. Where I work every day is the IRA, the $500 million that's been designated for high blends, the HBIP program, as we call it, which will, result in the installation of about 10,000 E15 pumps, which, is going to significantly increase the availability and sale of E15, a 15% ethanol and 85% gasoline blend. So when we look at the entire IRA package, we think that there's opportunities, abound there, but the devil is in the details, and we've got to have some guidance from the government in order for us to get to some of these production and these other tax incentives.
Thank you. It's interesting to hear about this devil in the detail. So having some tools, but how do you leverage them? How do you make this happen? And very interesting also to hear about the installation of the E15 pumps. Yeah. And if I follow up and I ask you, according to you, will the IRA in the end measures increase biofuel production that will go to only local consumption, only in the US? Or do you think that some of it could also go to exports and export markets?
Well, there's a chance it's going to do both, right? So the Sustainable Aviation Fuel alcohol to jet pathway has the potential, if we can realize all of it, to take up more than half of the US ethanol domestic production. That's a huge number. But the export market also continues to be a big opportunity for US ethanol. And even today, when we look at the countries and the destinations, even year to date for the 10 months that we have data on right now, markets that have been typically out of reach for US ethanol are being supplied today. For example, Europe has always been a tough market for US ethanol in terms of CI scoring, economic conditions. Yet you can see that we've been shipping there in 2023. So some of these markets, even with man-made obstacles for ethanol in Europe, when markets work, when we can get to the right CI score, when we've got all the tools, science is going to prevail today, and we're going to get Europe from a 5% ethanol blend up to a 10% ethanol blend, in order to reach their RED, the renewable energy directives, right? So I think that we're going to see lots of opportunities export while we're sorting out the details of alcohol to jet domestically. The jet fuel aviation market, that is a huge market that has been off limits to ethanol, my entire career, which is about 30 years. The other thing I would say is we're just coming out of the U.S. Grains Growth Energy, Global Ethanol Summit, where they hosted, 300 policy and decision makers in Washington, D.C. to talk about ethanol programs. What are the nuts and bolts of how to, initiate these programs? And I will tell you, I was super impressed with the event, and there was significant interest from everyone who came to fully understand the benefits of ethanol. And we were focused on ethanol.
Interesting to have your perspective over 30 years of career to see the changes and how there is a momentum now. So good to hear that. And you made a natural transition to what's happening in Europe. So that can be driving some of the markets also in the US, or at least that Europe can be an export destination. In Europe, we have indeed recent climate-oriented legislation, I will call it like that, and it's aimed at reducing greenhouse gas emissions. And in that framework, there was the ban on internal combustion engines for passenger cars from 2035. And this has strongly also promoted the electrification of road transport. So biofuels and advanced biofuels have a role to reach these emission reduction targets, but clearly electrification has been the preferred option in the regulatory framework. So what is your opinion on this? And how do you see the difference with the US? In terms of in Europe, we're very much with binding targets and a lot of regulation. And if you compare that with the situation in the US, what do you think?
Well, I think electrification can be a clean energy tool, but today we're not counting all of their carbon. Yes, those vehicles are zero tailpipe emission, but the electricity to power the vehicles is not all renewable or even low carbon. Another quick point is that electrification is not an option, not for folks that like me, that live rural. Range anxiety is real. And I think that even though battery technology is advancing, it's just not for everyone. What I'm reading about electric vehicles, and kudos to my colleagues in the auto industry that are engineering, very attractive, good-looking cars that have a lot of features and a lot of acceleration. I have a car that goes fast, but those cars are expensive, and they're almost getting out of the range of an average or normal consumer. And even with the government incentive programs, providing financial incentives directly back to the consumer, there's still some challenges with consumer not really buying into a battery or electric vehicle. So no matter which side of the pond you're on, consumers don't know if they can afford the electric vehicle. In some cases, they don't know what they're paying for electricity when they need to charge those cars. And I think the other major hurdle that the IRA and some other programs, both in Europe and in the US, are going to try to address is this lack of charging infrastructure, or like in the United States, the question or the concerns are around a significant percentage, 20, 25, 30% of our charging infrastructure is just inoperable. You pull up to the charge station and it just doesn't even work. When I think about the ban on internal combustion engines, that's incredibly concerning to me, right? I'm in a liquid fuels industry. I've been a renewable fuel expert for 3 decades. When I see the reality that even if we ban electric vehicles, by 2030, we're still going to have 60, 70% of the vehicles on the road by 2050 are still going to be powered by liquid fuels. So the good news is biofuels, we've got some opportunity and some time to find low carbon liquid fuels to power these cars, to still address our climate change goals while we are, providing a fuel that consumers want, right? And an energy that consumers have assets, right? That they have the vehicle. I think a huge mistake that we're overlapping is this hybrid electric, flex fuel vehicle. I'm very biased to that, but there's some real trials going on out there, and I think that's amazing. I think when I look at the U.S. and the U.S. or in the European Union car markets, the EU is still heavy diesel, the U.S. is still heavy gasoline, but I still think a lot of comparisons can be made. I think the price, supply, charging is a universal concern. Biofuels are just now being embraced by Europe. We've had E10 here in the market in the US for decades, all my life. And, we see Europe going to E10. I think those are positive signs. But, I just think that, the other stride that I'm watching is in the SGS INSPIRE data, which I use all the time, we see even some E15 popping up in Canada. We've seen some E15 popping up in retail stations in Europe. So I think as long as we keep all of our options on the table, I think we've got a chance of reaching these goals by 2050.
Absolutely. Having all the options is definitely key. And talking about the role of biofuels to reach those climate targets, I want to ask you about carbon capture and storage and the IRA measures around that. And do you see this as a real tool to increase the sustainability of biofuels?
Yes, absolutely. And I worked for ADM when they started their carbon capture and storage. So I absolutely think that carbon sequestration well, we have to make sure it materializes. That is a very large carbon intensity score reduction, like 20, 25, 30 points. And in order to take advantage, of CCS technologies, we've got, you've got geography challenges, we've got measurement challenges, we've got some of the most natural caverns to store carbon, our fermentation CO2, and we can store it safely. So I think those milestones have to be reached in order to get to, our net zero. Smart agriculture practices has the same amount of opportunity. We've got to get our fertilizer intensity, has dropped significantly over the last 20 years. We need those types of scoring mechanisms. And that's also in the IRA. Measuring soil organic carbon is a near but future midterm solution to getting to net zero. And, we've got the capability and the science, and I think we need to, make sure that we're educating and we're getting these techniques, carbon capture, sequestration, smart agriculture, and soil organic carbon are the three tools that are going to get, ethanol to a negative score. So, our plants in the United States, they look every day on how to produce their reduce their carbon score. I just saw a presentation on wastewater load at an ethanol plant and how you can gain a point or two by using some new technology just in wastewater handling. So, carbon, intensity has become our way of life, and it's the way of business for our ethanol plants in the U.S. now.
Thanks a lot for these insights. We're going to hear more from you later, but now I would like to turn to our other expert speaker today, Terrence Higgins. Let me say a few words about you, Terrence. You're an independent consultant with over 50 years of experience, 50, in refining and fuels manufacturing. You have provided consulting services, and you still, of course, do, on petroleum supply and demand, refining economics, fuel production and quality, and non-petroleum fuel blending. You've acted as an advisor to the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, the U.S. Departments of Energy and Agriculture, but also to international government bodies, International Industry Association, global oil companies, and technology vendors. So, Terrence, we are very pleased to have you with us today for this discussion.
Well, thank you.
And thank you for being here. And I have a question coming back to what Kristin said earlier about sustainable aviation fuels. So if we look back in time, in 2021, there was this coalition in the US who created a voluntary initiative called the Sustainable Aviation Fuel Grand Challenge. So basically, it was a coalition between airlines, airports, fuel suppliers, and environmental groups. And this initiative was launched to achieve net zero carbon emission for the US aviation sector by 2050. And then in 2022 came the IRA, introducing a new set of tax credits specifically for sustainable aviation fuel. So my first question is, could these IRA measures help this coalition succeed? But broader than that, what is your perspective on the use of SAF in the US and the panorama that you see for SAF in the US?
Well, I think that these measures definitely going to provide some assistance in moving toward the goals. I would be reluctant to maybe use the word to achieving their goals because I believe that the SAF production at least for the 2030 timeframe, was probably going to fall far short of those goals. Now, even though the IRA provides a seemingly generously set of subsidies, as Kristin said, there's the devil's in the details, and there are a lot of challenges for SAF and a lot of uncertainties out there. So personally, I'm a little pessimistic or less optimistic than maybe some others. And that's because first, the SAF is going to be expensive to produce. Reported estimates of the cost for hydrotreated esters and fatty acids, or HEFA, are about an average of about $4.70 a gallon, with a range between $3.50 and $5.50 per gallon. For ethanol to jet, it's about $7.90 a gallon, with a range between $7 and $11 a gallon. For some of the others, like LanzaJet, those fall in between the HEFA and the and ethanol to jet. Now, part of even the infrastructure investment, there's programs to promote technology development. There's a lot going on. I know that UOP Honeywell is promoting technology where they can significantly reduce some of the costs, particularly the investment cost by a modular approach. But still, I believe that these initiatives probably lower those costs by 20 to 25% over time. And that may not be that by 2030, but it'll be somewhere in that range. So even with that, the SAF is going to have a challenge overcoming the high cost. Now, secondly, the IRA credits, it's two phases. One goes from 23 to 24. Well, we're almost done with 23, and we really haven't gotten all the details, as Kristin mentioned, ironed out. So we're already lost that year. And then the second phase ends in 2027. So particularly for things like ethanol to jet, where there's really not a lot of movement on that yet, that's a very difficult and challenging time frame, as Kristin had mentioned was the case for the carbon capture. Now, history has it that these tax credits can be extended, and they were a number of times for biodiesel. But at the same time, when you look at the emphasis in our Congress on reducing costs and concern over the budget deficit, I think getting these extensions at this level is going to be challenging. Now, another concern area is the credits and incentives are got to be associated with 50% reduction in greenhouse gas. Now, for HEFA from tallow, HEFA from waste cooking oil, or from corn oil, that's not a challenge. However, for HEFA from grapeseed or soy and ethanol from corn, they will not meet the using the CORSIA default values for the carbon intensity. They will not meet that 50% that 50% threshold. So there'll have to be other measures taken, perhaps from the HEFA side, things like some green hydrogen, and then from the ethanol side, you're going to have to go. Probably have to go either with carbon sequestration or some of the changes in the farming practices, as Kristin had mentioned. So, the feedstocks, they use cooking oil and the tallow and corn oil as feedstocks. They're somewhat limited in that those are very tight markets now. There are a couple of other pathways that are approved, such as LanzaJet, but those volumes, I think, will also be small. So now the U.S., the CORSIA default values are what being used now, or what's called for to be used, but the U.S. has the option of looking at something else. And many of them have, many people, stakeholders are hoping for the adoption of the GREEP model. The GREEP model handles land use carbon much differently and much more favorably. And that will probably be able to bring the HEFA into the 50% range. So that probably would work. On the ethanol side, even with the GREEP model carbon intensities, you won't meet the 50%. So you'll have to have something like that carbon sequestration or changes in farming practices. Lastly, another issue with SAF is that SAF volumes, much of the SAF volume will come from renewable diesel facilities. There'll be modifications in renewable diesel facilities to make both SAF and renewable diesel. But that essentially says that any SAF production in those facilities comes at the expense of renewable diesel. And most renewable diesel is used in California because of the low carbon fuel standards and associated credits. And so and actually in California, at least in the economics I have seen, that the diesel is really more economically attractive than is the SAF. So there's another difficulty for SAF to take off. That being said, there is one last area that of proper promise for the SAF, and that is that a number of states individually have been proposing their own specific SAF subsidies, and that could be a game changer in terms of its comparison with renewable diesel, and also just in general its ability to overcome the high cost.
Thank you. Thanks a lot for that. You covered a lot of ground. Kristin, do you want to react to what Terry just said here?
Absolutely. I agree with all of his points. The challenges are there. The opportunities are there. Just for example, mentioning his state incentives, I live in the state of Illinois here in the United States, and we don't agree on what color the sky is here, yet we passed legislation in the state for, I think it's $1 a gallon for SAF, with the airlines working in conjunction with agriculture, because we know that's good for Illinois. So if you can get some of these great liaisons and some of these mutual beneficial situations going forward, you're going to enable the technology, and you're signaling to industry to make the investment that we're going to support this long term. And I think that's one of the challenges with the IRA is that not any one company can take advantage of every incentive in the package, right? You're going to have to work with your accounting firm or, some of your business insight, and entrepreneurs that can give you the right advice, or at least get you steered in the right direction. So you're making, you're spending $1, you get a 40-cent taxing credit, but you're still spending that $1 until you get the incentive back. And it all needs to be a return on investment. So I think the IRA and the administration are sending the right signals to industry to make the, to do the due diligence and to prepare and make the investments in these technologies. But it's not without its challenges and without risk.
What I heard here from both of you is that there is a form of uncertainty of what will be the future of the IRA in some ways, because of the elections next year in some way, and then Christy, you're saying that the state support can give a bit more certainty, maybe. So that's interesting. Maybe we can tackle this point at the end. But Terry, coming back to you and to what you said, if we look at Europe, we have now binding mandates for the use of SAF, and that goes until 2050 and beyond. And in Asia, we also see governments' plans to increase SAF use. We saw that in Japan, we saw that in South Korea, China, Singapore, Indonesia. Most of these plans are not, putting binding targets. So if you have this global perspective, can we imagine that the US would have binding targets like this, or is this a typical European mentality? If we do a bit of comparison between continents, how do you see this?
Yeah, I think is an interesting question. I think that binding targets are not very popular in this country, and I think they're getting more and more pushback as time goes on. So I don't really see U.S. moving toward binding targets. But to the extent that the world moves both toward binding targets or other policies that will encourage F, right, the U.S. has to, in some way, kind of join the team or be left out in terms of some of the international travel. So I believe there'll be something. I think binding is going to be difficult in this country. We've had, in a sense, some binding targets on things like fuel economy standards, vehicle emission standards, but there the EPA has or can have pointed to specific legislation that granted them that authority. No such authority really exists in the aviation fuel market. So I think, again, it's going to, there'll be something that'll come, I think, come of this. I really don't know what form that will be. And then the last point, again, is when you look at things like these state subsidies, that may be an option that'll open the door, and particularly if more and more of that moves towards the country as a whole, as opposed to a few states, we may see some movement in there in the federal government as well.
Interesting. Thanks a lot for sharing those views with us, Terry. Again, we will hear also from you a bit later, but now I would like to move to the hydrogen space. And I'm coming back to you, Jorge. First question, European players active in the hydrogen space are, I would say, lurking on the attractive support given to clean hydrogen production in the US via the IRA with this 10-year production tax credit. Can you tell us a bit more about this measure?
Yes, sure, Claire. So the long haul or the long-term nature of the Inflation Reduction Act is a key that will open the door for a potential success of the hydrogen market development in the US. The fact that these types of incentives will be available for such long period of time, 10 years, as you mentioned, is a game changer for the hydrogen industry and really for any other industry where they apply this type of incentives for a so long period of time. As you can imagine, the investors or any investor need some type of assurances or predictability of future cash flows before risking or putting at risk multi-million projects and set long-term investments for the construction of giant manufacturing plants. So this type of long-term incentives or credits provide this type of certainty to the companies or the investors to be able to have a more positive prediction of the market. But as right now, the hydrogen industry is not producing sizable renewable revenues, and in order to in the US, And in order to reach the full implementation, hydrogen companies rely on government subsidies like the Inflation Reduction Act. But right now, there is a great uncertainty about or a lack of clarity on the rules that govern the hydrogen tax credit needed or really needed to support the investments in the sector. Because currently, there is a huge conversation around or a current debate around how the government should measure hydrogen emissions in order to apply the incentives to the hydrogen productions. And the debate revolves around two main ways of thinking. One is develop the industry as fast as possible and working the hydrogen industry, justifying the use of any source of energy, although is not from green sources. This is, for example, the most rapid way to increase hydrogen production, or as we are seeing right now, is gray hydrogen that is produced from natural gas, but it's not considered a green source. And the second group that is a little more orthodox considers that we should take some time and really set the basis for the hydrogen industry be developed around greener foundations. So the feedstocks will come from a green source rather than fossil fuels. So the government first, or right now, the U.S. government first has to figure out how these credits from the IRA will be awarded to hydrogen production, and then the companies, given this or having this clarity, can start to adjust their investment plans based on the government decision.
Terrence and Kristy, do you want to react to that? Do you have a word about that?
No, I don't. I kind of agree with Jorge.
Yeah, I agree with Jorge too. You know, my comment is just the general one. We've been looking at hydrogen for 30 years in the United States, and we've spent billions and billions and billions of dollars in the U.S. Department of Energy, and we're not seeing it commercial yet, right? So the challenges remain, and I'm not intimately familiar with enough, just as a bystander who's also at the Department of Energy talking to them about, you know, future energy sources.
Thank you. Jorge, if I ask you, and I know it's a difficult exercise, but at SGS INSPIRE, we like to have a global perspective. So if I ask you to compare a little bit what you're seeing with regards to hydrogen, the IRA here in the US, with the rest of the world and what you know about the rest of the world, what would you say? Is it the same everywhere, or are some regions more advanced?
Yes, thank you. So I will say, or I will center my comment around the European experience, as it's seen as the most developed region in terms of hydrogen usage. So Europe is considered more advanced than the US in hydrogen markets for several reasons. One, or the most important, as I see it, is the policy and regulation framework, because the Inflation Reduction Act is plagued, or it deals a lot with incentives, but there is not a strong policy framework behind it to support these incentives, because incentives can get us until some point, but beyond that point, it needs some regulatory support to keep developing. For example, it doesn't matter how a hydrogen project, how cheap a hydrogen project could be, if there is no regulation that allows infrastructure development to take the hydrogen from this plant to the end users, if there is a not well-developed distribution network to get the hydrogen that is producing in some state or in some location to the final user. So the regulatory framework or policies must address these barriers or these shortcomings that the incentives are not, or by nature cannot do it. So that's why one is the main focus, or one of the main differences in Europe, if that's is that the European countries have been more proactive in developing and implementing policies and strong regulation in hydrogen development. The European Union has integrated hydrogen strategies into a broader climate and energy policies with an ambitious targets or mandates set for hydrogen production and utilization. And as a result, the infrastructure investment has been more uh, expanded in Europe, and the countries have been investing heavily in hydrogen infrastructure, including pipeline fueling stations and large scale production facilities. And finally, the market is more mature. Hydrogen market in Europe benefits from a more mature demand perspective, with hydrogen already being used in some other industrial applications. But the US is trying to keep up with these developments, or trying to catch up with Europe, applying this huge initiative as the Inflation Reduction Act. Uh, but as in my view, it has not yet established the same level of policy framework, so the market demand can develop in a more fast way. But there
Mhm.
are there are signs that the U.S. government is heading, or is poised to accelerate its hydrogen market development.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Before we open the questions and the Q&A for the audience, I just want to address one question to the three of you, and that would be, according to you, who is the big winner, or which technology, or which energy source is the big winner, which fuel is the big winner of this package? Maybe I start with Kristin.
Well, if we can get through all of the challenges, I think ethanol could step up here. So carbon capture, you know what I mean? CCS is an ethanol specific, right? Because we're capturing our fermentation grade CO2, and it's a 30-point carbon score reduction. That's major. Adopting smart agriculture practices, also in the IRA, that benefits all, right? All biofuels that are from agriculture, including our, HEFA and some of the other, some of the other elements. I think we can get to some of those, those benefits. The HBIP, the Higher Blends Infrastructure Incentive Program, does biodiesel and ethanol. So that's that's a twofer. But I think if we can materialize the CCS benefits and the tax incentives there, I think that puts us a little over the top in the ethanol category.
Thank you. Do you agree with that, Terry? What do you think?
Well, I agree that there's great potential there. I probably still think that the acts would probably the larger beneficiaries are probably electricity and the hydrogen. Now, again, all of those things put together could put ethanol into maybe a better position. Another interesting thing about the ethanol, Kristin had mentioned the higher blend, the higher blend subsidies or higher blend subsidies, and I was probably somewhat pessimistic on the SAF. An interesting thing is, if you look at actually carbon emissions, and even though the people who developed the IRA or the policymakers really weren't viewing it this way, but if you look at the ethanol, adding ethanol into gasoline creates greater emissions reduction than the same volume of ethanol gone into SAF.
Yeah.
Interesting.
you already hinted at this idea of a sort of a competition between, use in road transport or use in aviation. So that's interesting. I asked the same question to you, Jorge, about who is the big winner. Is it ethanol? Is it hydrogen? Is it electricity?
Yes, as of right now, I could agree with Christy, saying that the ethanol is as of now the big winner. But if the government can figure out a way to materialize all the programs or all the incentives that are aimed at developing the hydrogen industry, I would risk to say that as an amount of money put into the sector or into the industry, hydrogen it has no competitor. Just in the amount of support that is receiving in the hydrogen shots, the infrastructure, bipartisan law, the Inflation Reduction Act, and so on. But it still has to materialize. It's just given its first steps to be a mature or a consolidated market, the U.S. hydrogen market.
Thank you. Interesting, interesting views. It's also a question of how the IRA will be best leveraged. I would like to turn now to the audience. So if you want to send us some questions, there is an orange and gray Q&A icon at the bottom of the webinar landing page. So this is what you need to use to send us your question. It can also be a comment or reflection. Please do that. And while you do that, we have a last poll question, and we're going to push the poll to you. So same mechanism as at the beginning. What is the most effective mechanism to promote cleaner transport fuels? We already briefly touched upon that, so you know what our experts think. Is it setting mandatory targets? Is it providing market and financial incentives? Interesting to hear from all of you in the audience. While you answer to this question, I have another question for our panelists. So we in Europe, we've looked a lot at the IRA, and in some ways, observers have said that the IRA has been a reply to our wave of climate-friendly legislation, which was the Green Deal and the Fit for 55 package. And then the IRA came as an answer from the US side. And then, of course, in Europe, we had our own little industrial strategy, the Net Zero Industrial Act. But beyond that, what I would like to ask you is also the true mission of the IRA in the end something that is more related to also an industrial strategy to boost the Made in America green economy? Do you see that aspect of it as well? So beyond the pushing for emission reduction, supporting certain technologies, could you comment about that? What do you see an angle in this? Kristin, maybe I can ask you to start first.
I think that we have seen some criticism that this is a Made in America type of program where we're incentivizing things that we do really, really well, right? We're the global leader in agriculture. We have every intention of feeding and fueling the world with our agriculture. And, I am a farm kid, and I see the benefits coming back to the farm here, right? We are reinvesting. We're doing a lot of research. Our fertilizer usage has gone down. Our equipment on the farm is very expensive, but we can, we're affording it because we're having success, right, in our agriculture areas. And that's no different than Brazil and their promotion of their sugarcane, right, and their carbon intensity. And we see a good corn market coming out of Brazil, right, over the next couple of years. We see the same in the Clean Fuel Standard in Canada, where they have goals to decarbonize their energy sector while still promoting and protecting their crude oil markets, right? I mean, we still, I don't think that the U.S. Inflation Reduction Act is any different than our Energy Independence and Security Act, right, which enabled the renewable fuel standard, which is still one of the very most important policies that we've ever had here in the United States. So I think maybe it could, but I think that's short-sighted to believe that no country does the same, right? Or invests in its own intelligence and its own workforce, right, and its own economy.
Well noted. Terry, any comment about that? Any reaction?
I agree with Kristin very much. And in fact, if you look at politicians, they listen carefully to the farming community. So there's got to be a piece of it looking after their own industry. But also, I think if you look at the Inflation Reduction Act, it's really there's really been two acts lately. There's also the Infrastructure Investment Act, and they both contain also some very specific labor and wage provisions that are designed to to protect the worker, protect their wage level. So there's definitely some of that protection in there. I think they also have pretty much opened up the fact that they wanted, where there's technology advancements coming on, such as battery production and the mining of some of the key chemicals, that they're looking to improve our position in being able to satisfy some of our own needs.
Mm-hmm. Jorge, you have a word about this, or what do you think?
Yes, just very, very quickly, I agree with both Terry and Kristy. And just to mention that every country has different stages of development or its own particularities, and applies the method or the most efficient way they think to promote a market or protect it. So the Inflation Reduction Act is not per se a protectionist act, but what I think is that it nourishes some of the sectors that are not well developed in order to get them in shape to compete globally. So that's applying. It's like a way of protectionism, but not really.
Very good point, Jorge. Very good point. Well, we have received in the meantime 2 questions. So let's just look at the poll results first. Setting mandatory targets. Okay, most effective mechanism. Interesting. Definitely in Europe, which is the continent that I know best, this would be the answer. But in the end, as Terry said, it's not going to be the solution for SAF in the US for sure. No binding targets on the horizon. We have 2 questions from the audience. One is about the colors of hydrogen. This is a typical question indeed. And I think, Jorge, you were alluding to that earlier. So maybe you could develop on that. And the second question is, in the end, which are the main weaknesses of the IRA? I think, Kristy, you already mentioned, a few of them. But so if you could take those 2 questions, maybe I can start with Jorge on hydrogen and then Kristy. Is that okay?
Sure.
Yes, sure. So very quickly, the colors assigned to hydrogen refer to the production process and the environmental impact associated with each method. For example, gray hydrogen is produced from natural gas through a process that is called steam methane reform. Blue hydrogen is essentially the same as gray hydrogen, but it has also the capture of carbon emissions. So it reduces the carbon intensity, so that's called blue. Green hydrogen is produced using a method called electrolysis, using water from renewable energy sources as wind, solar, or solar or hydroelectric power generation. Pink hydrogen is produced using nuclear power as energy source, and those are the most common ones. There are some others, but they are not so typically used.
Thank you, Jorge. And Kristy, about the weaknesses.
Well, the weaknesses are the fact that we're a year into the IRA implementation, with what, a very short runway, that January 2025 is not that far away, right? We're coming into our last 2 months of the year of 2023, and we don't have some answers on how to get access to these credits and where you can make investments, right, to add some of this carbon reducing technology and then take advantage of the incentive program. So I think, we need our government to, we've got a full staff now. We've got everybody, got a House Speaker in place. And so hopefully we can get some of these really difficult questions answered so that, our companies and our biorefineries can make decisions to get to the best return on investment. And I think that is one of our single greatest challenges.
Thank you. And a final word from you, Terry, on the weakness or weaknesses.
Yeah, I think I agree with what's been said. I just would summarize them. I think it's the short timeline and the uncertainties which aren't yet answered.
Very clear. Well, thanks everyone. Much appreciated conversation. I'm really looking forward to following this, the different chapters of the IRA and how things will unfold in the future. And just a final word from my side. We'll, of course, be back as SGS INSPIRE with another webinar early December. We will launch our annual global report on transport fuel markets and transport policies. So every year we provide an overview on what happened in each the region that we cover. So tune in for that. And again, thank you to everybody. Have a good day or good evening, depending on where you are. And well, we'll see you next time. Thanks again, Kristin and Terry. Much appreciated.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.